think type O is just a blood type? DNA reveals a dark, centuries-old secret. Your ancestors weren't just survivors, they were the ultimate genetic warriors against history's deadliest plagues. For decades, doctors treated O like the plain one. No frills, no story, just the universal donor sitting quietly in the corner of every blood bank. But scientists who started digging into ancient genomes found something nobody expected. In parts of the Americas, indigenous communities don't just lean toward type O. They're almost entirely type O. Not 60%, not 80%. In some tribes, the number climbs past 99%. That's not a coincidence. That's not random chance scattered across thousands of years. That's a signal proof of something that happened to an entire population, written directly into their blood. So what actually happened? Why did one blood type take over an entire continent while the rest of the world stayed mixed? The answer touches plagues, ice age migrations, oceans nobody thought were crossed, and a secret some scientists are still arguing about today. And it starts with a mystery nobody saw coming. Stick around, because by the end of this, you'll understand why type O might be the most important blood type in human history. Let's start simple, because the simple version is what most people think they know. Human blood comes in 4 main types: A, B, AB, and O. The difference comes down to tiny markers called antigens sitting on the surface of your red blood cells. Think of them like ID badges. Type A wears the A badge. Type B wears the B badge. Type AB wears both. And type O? It wears nothing at all. No badge, no marker, completely blank. That blankness is exactly why O became known as the universal donor. Because there's no A or B antigen for the immune system to react to, O blood can be transfused into almost anyone without triggering a violent immune response. In an emergency room, when there's no time to test someone's blood type, doctors reach for O negative. It's the safest bet, the one that buys time when seconds matter. For most of the 20th century, that's where the story ended. O was useful, O was common, O was simple. Case closed. Except O isn't supposed to be the default. Geneticists believe type O actually came from a mutation, a chunk of genetic instructions that got deleted from the gene responsible for building the A and B antigens in the first place. In other words, O isn't the original blood type, it's the glitch, the accident. And yet, somehow, that glitch didn't just survive. In huge parts of the world, it took over completely. Globally, type O is the most common blood type, making up close to half the world's population. That's already strange for something that started as a deletion. But it gets stranger. Travel to certain indigenous communities across the Americas, and that number doesn't hover anywhere close to half. It climbs to 90, then 95. In some tribes, it brushes up against 100. An entire population almost uniformly carrying a blood type that began as a mistake. That's not background noise in human genetics. That's a signal. And once researchers started asking why one continent looks so different from the rest of the world, they uncovered something most people have never heard. Nobody expected this. So why does one continent look so different from the rest of the planet? To answer that, you have to zoom out and look at how blood types are scattered across the globe. In Africa, where human life is believed to have begun, type O shows up at high rates, which is part of why some scientists think it might be one of the older variants still circulating widely. As populations pushed into Europe and Asia, the picture shifted. Type A became more common across Western Europe. Type B rose sharply through Central and Eastern Asia. The neat 4-letter system started splitting unevenly across continents, shaped by thousands of years of migration, disease, and isolation. Then there's the Americas, and this is where the pattern stops behaving the way it should. Instead of a mix like Europe or Asia, indigenous populations show overwhelming, almost uniform type O in some communities, reaching frequencies most geneticists never see anywhere else on Earth. The leading theory traces back to the last ice age, when small groups of early humans crossed a land bridge connecting Siberia to Alaska. These founding populations were small, and many of them likely carried type O blood already. When a tiny group founds an entire population, whatever traits they happen to carry get carried forward 2 multiplied across generations until they defined the whole group. That alone might explain part of the story. But there's a second piece. Once those early migrants settled into the Americas, the continent became isolated. Two oceans on either side meant almost no new genetic material flowed in for thousands of years. No new blood types drifted in to dilute the gene pool. No outside populations mixed in to balance it out. Type O simply had no competition. It became entrenched, generation after generation, until it defined entire nations of people. Compare that to other isolated populations around the world. Some Pacific islands show similarly skewed blood type frequencies for the same reason: isolation locking in whatever genetic deck the founders happen to be dealt. But nowhere does the pattern run as deep or as consistently as it does across the Americas. Numbers like that don't show up by accident, so scientists went looking for proof, and decades of research have backed it up again and again. Researchers studying Native American populations across multiple communities have repeatedly found something almost unbelievable. In some groups tested, close to 99% of participants carried type O blood. Not a strong majority, not a clear trend. Nearly everyone, in study after study, long before anyone could even sequence a genome properly, and it wasn't isolated to one region. Similar numbers turned up everywhere researchers looked, from indigenous communities in the snowy reaches of Canada down to groups living deep in the Amazon rainforest. Different climates, different diets, different languages, completely different environments, and yet the same blood type dominating again and again. So what was actually happening? The leading explanation comes down to natural selection, working exactly the way it's supposed to over thousands of years. Early populations crossing into the Americas faced brutal conditions: harsh climates, unfamiliar pathogens, and constant physical demands just to survive long enough to reproduce. In environments like that, even a small biological advantage can snowball. If type O blood offered even a slight edge against the infections and diseases circulating at the time, the people who carried it would have been more likely to survive, more likely to have children, and more likely to pass that same blood type down. Repeat that pattern across hundreds of generations, and a once random genetic trait stops looking random at all. It starts looking inevitable. This is the part most people miss when they hear type O is common. Common doesn't mean ordinary. In the Americas, common means selected, chosen, generation after generation, by forces invisible to the people carrying it. Their bodies were quietly fighting battles they never knew about, and the survivors passed the proof forward in their blood. Modern DNA analysis has only confirmed what decades of blood type research first hinted at. This wasn't drift, it wasn't coincidence. It was survival, written into the genome of an entire continent, one generation at a time. But survival pressure wasn't the same everywhere, and that's where the story gets even more specific. Take the Andes, where some indigenous populations have lived at extreme altitude for thousands of years, breathing air with a fraction of the oxygen found at sea level. Their bodies adapted in remarkable ways over generations, and researchers noticed something curious sitting underneath those adaptations. A striking number of high-altitude indigenous communities carried type O blood. It's a contested theory, but here's the idea. Some researchers suggest type O blood may flow somewhat more easily through narrow vessels, potentially aiding oxygen delivery to tissues, though this isn't widely accepted in mainstream hematology and remains unproven. At sea level, any difference would barely register. At 12,000 feet, proponents argue it might matter more. It's a small, speculative biological tweak with a possible payoff in exactly the kind of environment where these populations settled. Then there's disease. Historical records suggest that people carrying A or B antigens were hit harder by certain infections, because some pathogens are built to latch onto those exact molecular markers, like a key fitting a lock. Type O, lacking both, simply doesn't offer that same foothold. While malaria wasn't a major threat in pre-Columbian America the way it was in Africa, the broader principle still applies. Fewer molecular targets for pathogens to exploit means fewer ways for disease to spread through a population. Diet adds another layer, though a far shakier one. Indigenous communities ate wildly different foods depending on where they lived, from seafood-heavy diets along the Pacific coast to corn-based diets across Mesoamerica. Some have speculated that type O metabolism might handle high-protein, high-fat diets differently, an idea that echoes the popular blood-type diet, and one most nutrition scientists consider unproven. And then there's the social piece, easy to overlook but impossible to ignore. In small, tightly connected communities, a person whose blood could save almost anyone during childbirth or injury wasn't just lucky, they were valuable. That kind of value doesn't just save lives in the moment over generations. It can quietly shape who survives, who thrives, and whose genes get passed forward. Before I show you the last part, if you've ever looked at your own results and wondered where this ancient type O bloodline fits into your ancestry, I put it all together in a guide called Where Do You Really Come From? Link is in the description. But stay right here because what comes next is the part most people completely miss. If the fossil record and old blood tests gave us the outline of this story, modern DNA technology is what's finally filling in the details. Over the last 2 decades, genetic testing has become precise enough to trace bloodlines back through specific tribes, specific regions, even specific historical figures, something that would have sounded like science fiction not long ago. One of the clearest examples involves a direct descendant of Sitting Bull. Using DNA testing, researchers confirmed a genetic connection linking a living relative directly to one of the most significant figures in Native American history, closing a gap that family stories alone had never been able to fully prove. For descendants of indigenous peoples, this kind of confirmation means something far bigger than satisfying curiosity. For generations, colonization disrupted records, broke up families, and in many cases deliberately severed people from their tribal histories. DNA testing has become one of the few tools capable of reconnecting some of those broken threads, offering a way back to ancestors, languages, and communities that history tried to erase. It's not just about identity in the abstract either. For many indigenous people, proving ancestry through DNA can affect access to tribal recognition, resources, and rights tied directly to heritage. A genetic test isn't just a curiosity purchase in these cases. It can be the difference between being formally recognized as part of a community or being shut out of it entirely. But this power comes with real tension attached. The same DNA data that reconnects people to their roots can also be bought, sold, and stored by private companies with their own commercial interests. Questions about consent, privacy, and who actually controls this information have become some of the most contested issues in the entire field. Treating someone's genetic heritage like a product to be packaged and monetized sits uneasily next to its deeper purpose, helping people understand who they are and where they came from. Scientists working in this space increasingly argue that done responsibly, with indigenous communities involved in how their own data gets used, this technology becomes something rare, a tool that can heal historical wounds instead of deepening them. Some DNA results don't just confirm a family tree, they spark real debate about what scientists thought they knew about an entire continent. That's exactly what happened with a man named Crawford, living on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation in Montana, one of the largest Native American reservations in the country. When a commercial DNA testing company analyzed his ancestry, the results went far beyond a typical family history report, though it's worth noting this wasn't a peer-reviewed academic study. The company's findings suggested an unusually deep genetic timeline, a claim that remains contested among archaeologists and hasn't been validated by mainstream research. For decades, the dominant theory was simple. Small groups crossed a land bridge from Siberia into Alaska, then spread south over generations. If Crawford's commercial test results hold up to scrutiny, they'd complicate that timeline, adding fuel to a growing argument among some researchers that the real story might be older, messier, and far less linear than the textbook version suggests. And the deeper scientists dig into ancient genomes, the stranger the picture gets. Take Neanderthals and Denisovans, 2 ancient human groups long dismissed as primitive evolutionary dead ends. Genetic analysis tells a very different story. Both groups share enough similarities with modern humans that some researchers argue they should be considered close relatives rather than separate, inferior species. Archaeological evidence backs this up too, revealing complex toolmaking, artistic expression, and even symbolic behavior among Neanderthals' capabilities once assumed to belong exclusively to modern humans. And here's the detail that changes everything. Many people alive today carry traces of Neanderthal DNA in their genomes, proof that these groups didn't simply vanish. They interbred, mixed, and left fingerprints still visible in human genetics tens of thousands of years later. Then there's Lake Baikal in Siberia, the oldest and deepest freshwater lake on Earth, sitting at the center of an ancient migration story most people have never heard. For thousands of years, this single location served as a genetic crossroads where populations from the east and west met, mixed, and exchanged DNA long before anyone wrote any of it down. Some researchers believe the ancestors of Native Americans passed directly through this exact region on their way toward a continent nobody had ever stepped on before. But the strangest discovery might be the one nobody saw coming, at all proof that indigenous Americans had contact with people from across the open Pacific, centuries before European contact. Genetic evidence shows that Polynesians and Native Americans interacted roughly 800 years ago, an encounter that left clear traces still detectable in DNA today. This isn't a small claim. It means someone, somewhere, crossed thousands of miles of open ocean and met people who had never seen them coming. The clues had actually been sitting in plain sight for a long time. Sweet potatoes and bottle gourds, crops native to the Americas, show up in Polynesian archaeological sites with no other explanation. For years, that evidence sparked fierce debate, with plenty of scientists dismissing it as coincidence or contamination. But newer genetic studies changed the conversation. Researchers found shared DNA segments across multiple Polynesian islands, all tracing back to the same indigenous American source evidence of real intermarriage, not random chance. Using computational techniques, scientists even traced that ancestry to a specific region in what is now Colombia. And this connects to a bigger question, still unresolved. How did people actually first reach the Americas? The land bridge theory remains the dominant explanation, but it's far from the only one on the table. Some researchers argue for a coastal route, hugging the shoreline by boat rather than walking overland. Others raise the possibility of travel across polar ice. And many indigenous nations, including the Navajo, hold their own origin stories, accounts describing peoples who were always present on this land, not arrivals from somewhere else. Science hasn't settled that question, and it may never fully agree on a single answer. What it has settled is this: Type O blood isn't a footnote in any of these stories. It's tied to migrations across oceans, survival through plagues, adaptation to altitude, and connections between continents nobody expected to find linked at all. And it's still doing exactly what it always has. Right now, in hospitals everywhere, Type O blood is being transfused into patients who have no idea their lifeline traces back through every twist of this story. So the next time someone tells you Type O is just the simple, universal blood type, you'll know better. It's not blank. It's not boring. It's a record written in molecules. Instead of words of ice age crossings, plagues survived, mountains adapted to, and oceans somehow crossed by people history almost forgot to mention. For millions of indigenous people across the Americas, that record isn't abstract. It's running through their veins right now, the same way it ran through the veins of ancestors who made it through conditions most of us can barely imagine. Science still doesn't have every answer. How exactly humans first reached this continent, why Type O won out so completely, what really happened on those Pacific shores 8 centuries ago. These questions are still being argued over in labs and journals today. But one thing isn't up for debate. This blood type carried people through history's hardest moments, and it's still quietly doing the same job in hospitals right now, long after anyone remembers why it mattered in the first place. If you're Type O, you're not carrying a footnote. You're carrying a survival story centuries in the making. Which part of this surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments.